The crew of the Warhound and Dara were proud of their efforts. Ascending to the inner palace was no easy feat, with the dust killing any attempt to bring in sarcophagus ships, and the fallen sections of the ultimate wall offering a kilometers high tectonic landslide of rubble, far beyond the limits of most Titan stabilizers. The first few god machines that made it up into the districts of the inner palace were confused with the wasteland of bombarded rubble, where their isolated titans were the tallest buildings standing. Whole regiments of bastions, castles, spires, and colonnades lay in ruin, hammered to powder from orbit, or overrun by the hordes of the War Master's infantry. The titans of the Martian Mechanicum lacked the luxury of such swiftness. As they began to arrive, few loyalist titans met their cautious advance. Most of them circled the remaining bastions, or had run for the safety of the Sanctum Imperialis. Hindara and her crew were in the first wave to make it up to the avalanche of the Ultimate Wall. One breach among dozens. It was a vast slope of broken rock between them and their vindication. It took several days, trying step by step, forcing stabilizers and compensators and gyro balancers into the crimson, until Hindara's reactor was breathing fusion at their backs. When they'd stopped, letting the iron fire cool, letting their tech priests soothe the machine spirit, before trying the next steps, when the readings were out of the red. Other Titans retreated to the coffin ships, resolving to an airlift into the plateau. Time to time, it all looked the same. All the while, the defenders fell back to the fortifications of the Palatine Ring. Many Titans attempted the climb. Every step had the calculated and estimated in equal measure, with each Titan's void shields lowered to push power elsewhere. Ground teams, the few Skitarii units that still could be trusted not to rush ahead, did what they could to clear patches in the landslides for large clawed feet to slam down. In Handara's ascent, she'd fallen twice. The first was a simple slip early on, a miscalculation. As dangerous as it was, forward was the safest way to fall. Moderatus Otesh had moved with cold clarity at the controls. Hammering down the dragging leg at an oblique angle, with enough force to punch through loose rock and keep them in place for precious seconds, as she needed to swing Hindara back to stability. The crew had cheered her for that. Even other Titans, those near enough to see Hindara's silhouette in the dust, had voxed their appreciation, or in some cases, their mockery. The broken communication web allowed just barely for some of it to make even sense. The second fall was worse. Close to the top, after days of slow progress, the boulder's scree gave way beneath them, just as it had for many others. The reactor roared with the machine spirit's frustration, and in truth its fear, as it all happened excruciatingly slow. The grind of rock, the whine of straining iron, and the disgusting serene tilting as they started to go over. Hindara toppled sideways and backwards, its stabilizers squeaking as they were relieved of all pressure. The crew knew they were dead. Falling from this high up on the avalanche was death, even if they survived, which was unlikely, and even if their Titan didn't smash itself to pieces, which was less likely, Hindara wouldn't be craned back to her feet for weeks, if ever. There was nothing resembling that kind of coordination and organization left in the war. The crew all knew this, had borne it in mind every step of the avalanche, and had it flash to the fore in each of their minds as they started arcing backwards. The rocks ground and rumbled, sliding. Ahead of them, disappearing in their tilting eye windows, was the Mortis Reaver Vicarinex. She was even closer to the top, surrounded by a small horde of laborer tech thralls. The words spilled from Princeps Ulin Grun's mouth, without thought and without care. Not shouted, not panicked. Just a whisper, breathy with instinct. Fire the Ursus claw! Moderati Secundus Hemercool had a half second to balance the roiling fire arc figures against his own guesswork. He moved Hindara's arm by muscle memory, with no time to lock the firing braces down, and squeezed both triggers. The cockpit shuddered with the kickback of its blind fire. Hindara whined as her arm socket took the brunt of an unbraced release. It all happened within the span of a half a dozen heartbeats, from slipping to claw fire, but the timing made no difference. They could have had a day to decide. It didn't matter. There was only one thing to fire at. The harpoon took Vicarinex in the back. Another 5 meters higher, a single second later, and it would have missed completely. The 3-taloned Ursus claw lanced through the Reaver's rear carapace armor, where composite plating of adamantium, plasteel, and ceramite was the thinnest. It buried itself within a thundercrack, driving deep into the machine god's internals, reducing 2 tech priests to a spread of gory debris in the engine room. It missed Thetis' reactor, and it served its Titan's heart, instead punching all the way to the industrial pillar of Vicarinex's spinal column. The great claw snapped shut around a fistful of sacred, mangled metal, and it locked hard with the activating clangs of micromagnetic blinding. Vicarinex ceased all locomotion. For a moment, the towering god engine stood facing the ascent, with almost philosophical calm. In her shadow, Skitarii and Servitor stood aghast, unable to believe the scratched lenses they had instead of eyes. They were worshippers at the feet of divinity, and their goddess had just taken a spear in the spine. Hindara jerked. She buckled. She started turning. Both Moderati worked at their controls, white-knuckled and teeth clenched, staring as best they were able to bring its legs back into alignment. "There's nothing to stand on! It's going out from under us! Nothing to stand on!" This from Moderatus Otish. "No," Princeps Ulin was mouthing, the lone word a silent chant. "No, no, no!" One foot crashed down. Rock shivered underneath them. This is Echoes of Eternity. One foot crashed down. Rock shivered underneath them, shuddered harder and kept slipping. The other foot smashed down. Then the first again. They staggered on the rock, unsteady, like a wounded wolf. Motors revved in the Warhound's torpedo arm as her crew hauled on the anchored Ursus claw for stability. Blessed iron screeched in Hindara's shoulders as her sockets stretched and warped with the strain. That was when Vicarinex screamed. The Reaver let loose with her war horn, crying out above the rumble of the avalanche. In that moment, she sounded pathetically, horrifyingly alive. "We are stable!" Moderatus Cool's laugh was hollow with disbelief. "We are stable!" And he was right. Hindara settled, her joints winding down. Vicarinex turned towards them. Started to turn, at least. The wreckage of her spine wouldn't allow it. She would never complete that turn, just like she'd never walk again, never wage another war. Her turn became a tilt, and the tilt became a fall. Vicarinex gave another warhorn scream, the last shriek of a betrayed godling. She vented plasma from her carapace slits, uselessly breathing poison fire into the filthy air. In an act of either mindless panic or naked spite, she opened up with her cannons, her arms pouring forth volleys of blinding laser fire that echoed like thunder. With her dying cannonade, she liquefied her own worshippers and burned the rocks around her to black glass. "Detach!" Ulin ordered. "She's going over! Detach!" They couldn't detach. The Reaver was going to take them with her if she fell down the landslide. They'd save themselves only to doom themselves, and Hindara couldn't detach. Cole tried the levers again, tried the triggers again and again and again. The micromagnetics had unbound, the grip had eased, but the claw was still buried in Vicaronix's ribs. They'd punched too deep. Blow the lynch locks! Cole hadn't needed the order. He was already doing it. Hindara's reactor flared at the insult as power ran hot to her extremities. Bang! 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 Went the emergency failsafe charges on her shoulder, detonating the lynch locks, attaching the claw to her body. She amputated her own arm, just in time. Vicaronix hammered down the rock slide, impacting face first, instantly killing her own crew. The immense weight of her body, striking the rubble, shook the earth, and set another landslide in motion. Boulders rolled on the tide of flowing gravel, flowing down the kilometers high slope. Further down, titans of various legions, each abraded their paint jobs by the ashy air and suffering with degraded scanners, ponderously moved aside or braced as best they could. It was far from the first such rubble tide. Through the useless spray of static and scrap code, Hindara heard voices damning them and lauding them for their treacherous survival. One of them stood above all the others, a white crackle that identified itself as Telem Ayer. She was a Mortis warhound, close enough to see the shadow play in the dust, and she raged at Hindara. Moderus Otesh shook her head. She was still pale with receding panic. They'd fire on us if they could, but they didn't. Telem Ayer was too far back down the slope, likely on ground too unstable to risk weapons discharge. Ulin listened to their raving as her heartbeat slowed to normal. She felt the chill of what she'd done, but her discomfort didn't reach the level of guilt. All order was gone from the War Master's forces anyways. As long as they could stay ahead of any other Mortis engines, there would be no repercussions. There was barely any hierarchy to answer to now. Since the wall fell, it was every god machine for itself. This is Princeps Ulin of Udax. I speak for Hindara. She had no idea if her transmission would reach Telem Ayer, but in the absence of guilt was reawakened pride. She didn't appreciate being spoken to in such a manner. Telem Ayer replied, more anger, paved thick with promises of retribution. Ulin let it play out in the background music for a time, baring her bloody gums in a smile, then sent back a clipped reply of her own to terminate the link. Engine kill! Their brush with death, so close to the top of the breach, had been 2 days ago. Since reaching the summit and striding through the breach, Hindara had stalked amidst the ruined districts of the Inner Palace, engaging in hour upon hour of hard fighting. She joined up with the legions of Astartes' forces, besieging Meru Bastion, and, battling one-armed, she'd helped bring down walls and destroy enemy tanks with volleys from her turbo laser. Few Legio Udax resupply vessels made the journey past the ultimate wall, isolating them in the vanguard. The truth was, Hindara had been in the fold for months since her first deployment on Terra's surface, and she'd seen better days since before her amputation. Incidental damage was adding up, and more serious wounds were rotting through her iron bones. That night before, as Meru Bastion fell, a nasty twist of fortune sent a missile pounding into Hindara's head. It had struck the moment her voids failed, scarring her cockpit with scorch marks, damaging several control systems, and splitting the reinforced glass of her eye windows. They were riven with cracks as complicated as cobwebs, further ruining the crew's already ash-limited vision. She marched with a hitching stride now, the joints in her right leg fouled by damage. She had to conserve her energy too. Her void shields no longer lit upon command, and with the pain of her injuries playing through her nerve cables, her crew kept her reactor banked to quieten her increasingly erratic machine spirit. Each of the Palatine bastions were fortress towns in their own right, ringing the Sanctum Imperialis in a boundary. Meru Bastion had been the ugliest, a brutal castle of a thing. Old data spurts painted it as a palace, but any beauty it once possessed was lost when Rogal Durn layered it with rockcrete and ceramite, and left its walls with hives of anti-infantry turrets. Tearing it down was a pleasure. Another of the loyalist strongholds dead in the inexorable march to the Sanctum Imperialis. There had been no sign of the Primarchs for days, not the angel of fire that Angron had become, not the creature that was supposed to have once been Mortarion. Perturabo was said to have abandoned the siege, but Ulin still saw masses of iron warriors within the horde. So who knew what was true there? Crackling transmissions from orbit promised Horus's landing was imminent, and Yulin considered those chanted promises no better than propaganda. She focused on the war before her, not the prayers coming from above. Avalon Bastion was next, its battlements a dark blur on the horizon. Word across the scrambled box was that the enemy were in full retreat now. Without organized reconnaissance, no one could be certain. But the few officers still relaying orders promised that Avalon was already deserted. Its defenders had fled. Hendara's spirit was impatient, psychosomatically jabbering inside Yulin's mind with dull, red throbs. Her crew had to keep her reactor muzzle to prevent her warrior's soul forcing them to charge out of cohesion. For now, World Eaters and Death Guard and Alpha Legionnaires ran before Hendara in a ceramite flood. No gunships backed them from above. The air support phase of the war was over, but the beetle shapes of Legion tanks broke through the ranks of infantry, and winged things soared through the dirty sky. Red-skinned things in the shapes of men and women, bloated things in the shape of alien flies, things that Hendara's crew called demons, glad at the layers of armor separating them from the creatures. Her eyes always slid away from the things the moment she tried to look at them. As soon as she looked away, she forgot they were there. The Horde had the numbers to bring about the war's end, while the defenders only possessed the numbers to delay it. But the losses were going to be grotesque. Yulin didn't want to die for the Emperor's stubbornness. She wanted to live, to see the War Master's ambitions come to fruition. She wanted to see the Imperium that Horus had promised. An empire for eternity. A kingdom of humanity that would never fall. Hendara grumbled, sensing her princeps unease, but too drugged by her cooled reactor to do anything more. There it was again. The treasonous little notion Yulin couldn't quite shake. Horus was a hero. The War Master of the Imperium. The pacifier of the galaxy. Of course she'd follow him. The Legio Udax willingly wore his colors and cast their fate with his. But what would be left after this war? What would be left of Terra and the armies fighting to take it? Surely even now, quiescent alien kingdoms at the Imperium's edges were reawakening, daring to cast jealous eyes at the worlds they'd lost in the Great Crusade. Would there be enough of the War Master's hosts left to hold the Imperium in its entirety? And what would those hosts look like, with all order and discipline and humanity raked out of them? The legions of Astartes were already blood-maddened and fighting by the side of those things. The regiments of Imperial army wearing the War Master's eye were no better. Yulin Gurn didn't want peace. Peace was boring. Peace was for the weak. She wanted wars she could win. And the Mechanicum, blessings upon its name, was turning on itself, speaking in shrieking cants of scrap code. Raving prophets advocated the abandonment of the self, immersion with the manifold, fusion with the machine spirit, conflicting philosophies from cults that had never agreed on anything before, but at least had the restraint to keep out of each other's ideologies. Now they screamed with a kind of scattered unity, praying for the sacrifice of the flesh and the soul to be reborn in the cradles of holy iron. Hendara wanted it too. Yulin could feel that. For now, Hendara waited, and the woman serving as the god machine's mind stared in the armored tide, rolling ahead towards the silhouette of the distant battlements. This was the first moment of stillness Yulin could recall in a long, long time. For months now, her physical world had been wholly within the confines of Hindara's cockpit. She escaped it only by blending her senses with her engines, living through its eyes and its guns, feeling Hindara's movements of her own. When Yulin had last breathed fresh air instead of the sweaty reek coming out of the filtration slits, how long had it been? When had she drunk anything but the recycled piss of her closest comrades? When had she last moved from her control phone? Yulin breathed in, catching the smell of her own feces. Her output filters had failed. When? Days ago? Weeks ago? Her legs were caked with her own waste. Her uniform was patchy with vomit that stank of stale nutrient paste. Once noticed, the stench of various filths encrusting her to the throne was omnipresent, practically overwhelming. Blurrily, she caught sight of her arm. Her hand was a black claw fused with the metal. My princeps. Jolted from her reverie, she turned her gummy eyes towards Otesh. Moderatus, she had acknowledged. Sands of Mars, but she was tired, so damn tired. Awaiting your orders, my princeps. Yulin stared at her crewmate. Otesh was carrion, her skin sick and sunless, her eyes dry. Yulin could smell her now, too, the spoiled meat sweetness of her. She'd been dead at least a week, even before they'd attempted to climb. At some point before she died, the Moderatus had bitten through her own tongue. Flies were growing fat on her face, crawling in and out of her open mouth. Yulin opened her eyes, or closed them. The dream stopped, or perhaps it started again. She wasn't sure which. My princeps, Otesh said again. You're dead, Yulin said, or thought. She couldn't tell if she was speaking or thinking. Even banked, Hindara's reactor was pressing at the back of Yulin's mind. A constant pressure, right into the gray meat of her skull. Are you dead, Otesh? My princeps. Yulin heard the words, or imagined hearing them. They were spoken by Otesh, or by the thing wearing Otesh's skin. Or they weren't spoken at all. Yulin felt warmth on her face. She was weeping. Or she was bleeding from her eyes again. Walk, she said, closing her hands around the arms of her control throne. She felt and heard her gloves creak. She was still wearing them. Her hands weren't black claws welded to metal. They weren't. Though she couldn't bring herself to look to make sure. We walk. Advance with the horde. Hindara rattled and clanked her way forward. The pressure eased just a little in Yulin's mind. The smell of foulness receded. The warhound's remaining weapon arm came up. Her stride, though hitched, became a loping run. The ground shook as she began outpacing the infantry. They were charging through the ranks of creatures, half hidden in the dust, and it hurt to look at. So Yulin kept her eyes on the walls. Spires were appearing through the dusty mist, blunted by bombardment. Fallen battlements, ruined defense turrets. If Avalon was truly abandoned, that meant a spillage of refugees and retreating soldiers in the expanses of no man's land between here and the Eternity Gate. To Hindara, it meant prey. The God Machine's soul urged its commander, with somatic nudge, through their tangled linkage. Yulin's skin prickled. She parted her lips, and blood made strings between her rotten teeth. The walls of Avalon Bastion grew taller, darkening, resolving, and then something new. Above the battlements, a lone star shone in the blandness of the ashen sky. Through the iron of her titan's bones, Yulin could hear the legions cheering, chanting at her feet, calling out to Hindara, to Horus, and to the creatures in their midst, to Angron, Angron, Angron. The newborn star started to fall, trailing a tail of fire. So while many books go through the taint of chaos through the Astartes. This one also goes into how insane the mortal followers also become. There's different tiers of insanity, I think, present here. Chapter 4, Path to Glory. He moved with the horde again, this time with Inzar at his side. The endless march was a matter of placing one boot in front of the other, his thudding bootsteps sending twinges through the nails in the back of his brain. They hurt. They had fangs these days, but they hurt less in Inzar's presence. He was one of the voices that eased their poisonous drip. Thinking came a little easier too. He started to remember things. Who he was, what he'd done, the names of various warriors around him. There was Drelath, Centurion of the 53rd Assault Company. There was Ragnar, bedecked with gladiatorial blades. Cargos couldn't recall the warrior's rank, but he knew Ragnar cheated at gambling games. Strange, what was coming back to him now? Cargos glanced at Inzar as they marched in broken rhythm. The word bearer seemed to have changed little, and there was a curious comfort in that. It put Cargos in mind of older days, when the word bearers had sent their chaplains to other legions at the apex of the Great Crusade. Many had regarded it as an act of needless fraternization. The world eaters were among those that had come around to the Secaments relatively swiftly. Inzar was a good example of why. He'd served with the 8th Assault Company, and Captain Karn had admired his cold tenacity a great deal, coming to trust Inzar's counsel. If Lorgar's legion had sent the preachers, the sons of Angron would never have granted them a moment's grace. But the word-bearers had sent warrior priests, who were far more warrior than priest. The chaplain had no truck with codes of wartime conduct. When notions of martial honor came up in debate, they made him sigh. He insisted such things were dreamt up by men and women, wanting to gird themselves in patchwork denial. Righteousness doesn't make a man a warrior, Inzar said at the time. Warfare does. A true warrior did whatever was necessary to win the war. All else was needless detail. Such was the creed of Inzar of Colchis, and the sentiment secured him a warm welcome in the Eater of Worlds. They were good years, were they not? Cargos cleared his throat. What? The years we fought together in the Great Crusade. A brutal time, my friend. Years of satisfying service. I think of them often. Cargos nodded. They had been good days. The galaxy stretching out before them, unconquered, ready to be carved apart by Legion blades and divided by the Primarch's desires. I always felt kinship with those of your bloodline. So many of my kindred brought whispers of warrior lodges and gladiatorial cults to the other legions. But those of us who fought with the world eaters never needed to preach. The glorious truth is that you and your legion were ripe for enlightenment from the very beginning. Enlightenment. A hell of a word for where we are here today. Don't speak of your blessing as a curse, Inzar said. The nails ache, but are you not stronger with them, more powerful of muscle, faster of reflex? You and your shitty poetry. Spare me the Medicaid analysis. I'm not an apothecary. Cargos licked his cracked lips. It wasn't funny, but he could feel the laughter coming up like bile. He fought the queasy feeling for as long as he could, but it racked him anyway. A sudden laughing fit that tore out like a series of abhorred howls. There was no mirth in the sound. He laughed only because the machine in his skull pinched those nerves at that point in time, and he danced to their song. Cargos had laughed like that a few times these weeks. It was worse than the pain, being forced to convulse by amusement you didn't feel. Inzar made no comment on it. He carried on speaking, as if there'd been no laughing. Your vocation is the very reason you should know better than anyone not to spurn these blessings you received. For shame, my brother! Cargos grunted, something that was neither agreement nor disagreement. How long had it been since someone had talked to him like this, sharing brotherly jests? He sifted through the blood-dimmed murk that passed through his thoughts. He didn't know. It felt like forever. He had only fragmented memories of the first analyses of the nails, the reports he'd witnessed in gleaming hololithic displays. Those diagrams of musculature, readouts of his digitally flayed brothers, had told quite a story. Even the genetically forged body of a space marine was fundamentally mortal. Signals between the brain, the muscles, and the central nervous system worked with mortal boundaries. The nails banished those boundaries. The pain engines overrode the electrical pulses between brain and body, letting warriors abuse their own bodies, pushing more kineticism through muscle and sinew, whether it was receptive or not. And it came with joy. As with all other emotions dulled, the adrenal delight of brutality soared. At Angron's wishes, the Legion's apothecaries had beaten the nails into their brothers' skulls, and then, righteously pleased with their work, the butcher surgeons of the Legion had implanted each other. They had sacrificed the solace of a painless life for greater physicality in the field of battle. Enzar turned his red-eye lenses upon the World Eater. Sacrifice has to hurt, Cargos. That's what makes it sacrifice. You give up something precious to earn something greater. I don't pity you, brother. I admire you. Your strength, your sacrifice is an inspiration to us all. After that, silence reigned. Exactly how long it lasted, Cargos didn't know. He was the one to break it. That a noble time later. Karn! He said to the dust. Enzar turned his helm towards the World Eater. Brother? I was the one, Cargos told him. The one who found Karn. Ah, you speak of Istavan. I know the tale, my friend. You've told me before. No, Scan found him on Istavan. And Scan called to me. On that day a lifetime ago, at the very beginning of everything, they'd pulled their captains out from under a land raider's treads. How long it had been since Cargos thought of Istavan. I have not seen Scan thus far during the war, Enzar noted. That's because he's dead. Ah, that grieves me. He was an excellent soldier. Ugh. A traitor, though, at the end. He tried to run from the Conqueror. Indeed? Then Shipmistress Saren did what had to be done. But you were speaking of Karn. Cargos grunted agreement instead of nodding. Another little shift in the mundanities of life since he received the implant. Moving his head, even the nod, sometimes spiked the nails. They said he'd been cut down by the Black Knight. Did you take that from Karn's body, or did he bequeath that to you with his final words? Take what? I didn't take anything from Karn. Cargos flinched. He was going to laugh again. The nails were going to make him do it. He didn't want to. Not so soon after the last time. Enzar's patience was incarnate. You took nothing, my friend? Stop smirking at me, you cohesion bastard. I hear it in your voice. As they trudged together, Enzar gestured with his sawtoothed Crozius mace. He aimed it at the weapon loosely gripped in Cargos' right hand. If you took nothing from Karn, then why are you carrying his axe? Karn had been on his knees when Cargos had found him. That more than anything else in the long months of this war told Cargos that the world has lost its mind. As he drew near to his commander, fortune favored him with the respite of lucidity. How long ago was this? Hours, days, weeks? No one agreed on how time worked anymore. No one agreed what hour, day, or week it really was. The haze had cleared more, the closer he came to Karn's fallen form. He wasn't sure where he was, at the border of one of the outer bastions, he figured. But enough of who he was came back to him. He felt a sense of uncomfortable horror at the sacrilege of his brother captain's pose. There was no shame in dying, but to kneel? You knelt to tyrants. You knelt to slave masters. You knelt to emperors. A bad omen, brother! Cargos crouched by the corpse. A bad way to die! Gorechild, Khan's axe lay in the rubble a few feet away. The binding chain was cleaved close to the captain's wrist. Khan had died without a weapon in his hand. Another bad omen. One Cargos didn't want his brothers to see. He called out for aid over the Vox, summoning a gunship he knew might never arrive in the ash. When he heard his brother's bootsteps approaching, he dragged Gorechild closer to Khan's slack fingers. The moment he closed his finger around the haft, Khan spoke to him. It was Sigismund. Khan's head stayed bowed, the crest of his helmet tilted in defeat. He was colorless in the dust, as they all were. His blood had long since dried around the rents in his warplate, giving dust something to cling to. He wasn't breathing. Cargos didn't need the tools of his trade to see that, and yet he spoke. Sigismund. The name echoed with uneasy certainty in Cargos's mind. For a moment he was back in the arena, in the Conqueror's fighting pits, watching Khan and Sigismund chained together, at the wrist dueling side by side. The truth was, back then, neither of the two captains had built much of a reputation for themselves in the gladiatorial arena. It was a truth universally acknowledged. With their lives on the line, they were among the fiercest warriors in the legions of Astartes. In war they were supreme, but that was war. In the fighting pits they were famously middling combatants, always fighting to first blood, rarely to third blood, never to sanguinis extremis, never to the death. Cargos had been the 8th Company's gladiator, blood spitter they called him, because he loved the fight dirty, spitting into his enemy's eyes. They all had names, fraternally bestowed, each more bombastic than the last. Blood Spitter, Black Knight, Flesh Terror. Fighting alone or chained to his pit brother, Cargos had no preference. He scarred his skin with kill cuts to mock the deaths he dealt. He'd driven Delirious that day aboard the Conqueror, when the centurion of the Triarii had succumbed to bloodlust and abandoned his post. Only then had Cargos showed mercy, letting his opponent live at his captain's request. If it wasn't to the death, it wasn't worth doing. Why fight at all if nothing was on the line? There's no prestige in playing games. They were words of his arena partner, his brother in chains. True then, true always. Killed by your chained brother, Cargos said softly to the kneeling figure. The bitterest blow. Khan's faceplate was cracked open, showing most of his face. He'd lost half his teeth with the blow that had shattered his helm. The wounds to his face and chest, let alone his face, let alone the fact he wasn't breathing, should have ruined his speech, but he sounded perfectly clear. I walk the eightfold path, Khan said without moving his lips, without moving at all. I walk the path to glory. A cluster of flies danced around a slow pattern across his bare skin. One of them alighted on the surface of his open eye. Cargos said nothing. Several shadows fell over him. His brothers were here. Get his body back to the Conqueror! The replies were mixed, a chuckle here, a growl of affirmation there. Why? One of the warriors grunted behind him. He was the best of us! That's why! Cargos rose, and Gorechild came up from the dust with him. The chain binding it to his wrist rattled with the age-old gladiatorial melody. The weapon's weight was a pleasure. He could feel the incantations of Karn's fingers in the grip. He could feel where the trigger rune had been worn smooth. After that, things had lost clarity. He couldn't remember loading Karn's body into any gunship. But he also couldn't recall leaving his captain there in the rubble. Or one or the other had to be true, and he had no idea which. His memories devolved to the gray-stained cycle of trudging forward, following shapes in the dust. Maybe that was when the march to the Eternity Gate had begun. So, in this book, there are mad people, but there's also ghosts. There was the Moderatus, who was dead at the console, asking for orders, and then there's Karn. But the ghost of Karn appears to several people, and if Kargos's perspective can be trusted, and it shouldn't be entirely trusted, then Karn is dead, and Karn had been dead for some time. So that is quite a revelation. He is one of the original heroes of 40K. So I personally think that Karn is dead, and that thing that we call Karn now, that whatever's on the battlefield swinging Gorechild around, that is what Karn is. Whoever holds Gorechild, that is Karn. So that's all it means to be Karn, is to be a champion of Khorne. Maybe it was, Inzar agreed. Kargos was silent as he watched the horizon. His throat was a parched channel down the painted meat of his body. Blood of the Emperor, but he was thirsty. Walls were beginning to appear in the murk ahead. High, dark smudges that were surely the battlements of one of the Palatine bastions. Meru, perhaps. Or Pythia. Or Avalon? No. Wait. Had they already fallen? It is the Avalon bastion, Inzar said. How do you know my thoughts? Kargos snapped. Can you read minds now? A gift from the things you call gods. The word-bearer's voice stayed patient, stayed understanding. You are speaking aloud, my friend. You have been talking ceaselessly since we met 3 days ago. 3 days? Almost 4. Kargos grunted. What might have been agreement or dismissal. Inzar breathed in deeply. And I'd wager you found Karn a week before that, perhaps longer. If you say so, preacher. Do you feel what I feel? That shift in the air, these last few hours, that presence nearby. Kargos felt nothing but needles in the back of his brain. He wasn't shy about saying so. Your father is here, Kargos. I sense his holy wrath, how it pulls the horde in his wake. We are but pilgrims in his shadow. Angron? Here? How long had it been since Kargos had first seen the thing his father had become? These were the kinds of thoughts he struggled to hold on to. They kept slipping, half-formed from his mind before they could find traction on his tongue. There! Do you see? Above the distant walls shone a single star. The moment Kargos' eyes fell upon it, they locked there, and a cooling shiver ran through his skin. The nails bit a bit deeper, but the pain was numbing, almost a relief. You sense it! I see a flicker in the sky. And you believe that is Angron? I know it is. The Neverborn sing of him behind the veil. It is a jealous song in truth. They envy him for the honor of his exaltation. They were created immortal. We mortals, even our Primarchs, must fight for it. And, through sacred fury, Angron has achieved it. He has won Kargos. He has walked the path, and oh, how they love him and hate him for reaching its end. The path, Kargos repeated. He could hear Karn's last words once more. We walk the eightfold path. We walk the path to glory. His blood iced. He had to suppress a shiver. Sounds like tiresome Colchisan doggerel to me. Does it really? Inzar's voice held no edge. I speak for the sake of your soul, my friend. I am here to guide you onward, as Lorgar guided Angron. None of us have a chance, Cargos. We all walk the same road now. Immortality? Immortality. Our eternal agony. I'm already in agony. You learn to live with it. No, my friend. You are in pain. Words cannot convey the gulf between mortal pain, which we all know, and the immortal agony, which awaits all of us. From the east came the great rattling tread of a Titan, Reaver class. It sent tremors through the ruined earth. Close enough for Cargos to see a hunched silhouette stalking forward. As it strode for the walls, a multitude of shapes that may or may not have been human ghosted at its heels. He heard pack howls from those shapes. He heard whispers that couldn't possibly cover the distance to his ears. Cargos himself, gripping the axe tighter as he looked at the chaplain once more. Don't jest with me, preacher. I am hardly a man of fine humor, Cargos. That was enough. For whatever reason, the notion made the nails itch, and Cargos had to growl the words through clenched teeth, biting back a sudden flux of unwanted laughter. What happens after we die? Do you really know? For the first time, Enzar's body language betrayed surprise. Cargos heard the other warrior's breath faintly catch, and heard the brief flinch in his companion's armor joints. He didn't answer at once. Instead, he kept his gaze on the sky, watching what he claimed to be the star of Angron's wrath. Now you choose to ignore me? Enzar finally lowered his gaze from the heavens. Your father has given your legion a great gift. The butcher's nails were the beacon that lit the way. Lorgar gave our legion a similar gift. He gave us the truth. Cargos let his gaze drift. Not to the star. He could feel its presence as a prickling heat against his skin despite his armor plating. But to the silhouettes and shadows of the horde all around. He watched them, his brothers, the things pretending to be his brothers, and the humans enthralled to it all. Enzar's soothing voice was a perfect percussion. It was an ugly truth. It almost broke him to learn that reality was a hateful lie, a thin crust over seething, smiling damnation. Can you imagine it, my friend? To be the first living being to learn, to truly know what awaits every man, woman, and child? That there is an afterlife of dissolution and an ocean of boiling horror? Cargos cracked his teeth together, hard to prevent whatever was building up in his throat from emerging as a sound. He felt as though he were going to vomit laughter. As it broke free, he feared he would lose control of his limbs, as if the nail's joy would somehow possess him. For who knew how long? More shitty poetry, Cargos murmured, doubting his own words, even as he spoke them. On the contrary, I am being as clear as I am able. Weaker souls, they will burn briefly, mere instants of agony before they boil away to become part of the warp. But stronger souls, the souls of psychers, they can look forward to an eternity of... The chaplain trailed off. He hesitated, tried again. We all face a simple choice. No faith in the God Emperor will save even a single soul. Oblivion awaits the weakest of us. Torment and eventual annihilation will be the reward for the strong. The gods behind the veil are wondrous beings, my friend, but they are wrathful, and by any measure of human perception, they are insane. The word bearers raise icons to the pantheon out of worship, yes, but there is a pragmatism in our faith. We are the legion that first found something worthy of worship, and the realm behind reality. But we are also the legion that found something to fear. Cargos could smell blood, and the back of his head was growing sickeningly hot. The nails were bleeding into his helmet. He felt his own wet life pooling at the back of his neck. He tried to speak and failed entirely. Lorgar saw all of this. He brought Angron to the precipice and gave your father a chance at immortality. A fool looks at him now and sees a monster. To those of us with vision, we see everything he has become. He is the Red Angel. He is the war god's son. A man that refused to accept mortal death and the agony of the underworld. He pissed on the notion of eventual oblivion. Instead, he chose to live forever, no matter the cost. Around them, shapes and shadows of other warriors began to howl and bay and roar. Cargos' skin prickled. It took intense effort not to join in and cry out loud, as bestial as the rest of them. Enzar's voice went on. You hate Angron for what he's done to you, for the sin of making you strong at the cost of reasoning minds. My friend, he has done so much more. He has given you a choice, something denied to so many others. You can choose to die as all mortals die, to suffer as all mortals suffer, or to walk the path and live forever. Enzar was the eye of the storm, the lone focus of calm. Titans shook the ground with their tread. Men and women and demons and the dead howled. As they did, Enzar raised his Crozius, aiming at the lone star in the sky. Look upon your father, Cargos, for above all else, he has given his sons an example to follow. Above them, high beyond the walls of Avalon, the flaming star began to fall. He has given you a Messiah,